Hey everyone, and welcome to a brand new video. Tonight we have 2 hours of stories. I hope you all enjoy them. If you do, please be sure to drop a like rating. Let's see if we can reach 600 likes on this one. Of course, only if you feel that this video is deserving of it. Subscribing if you are new is also very much appreciated, as I post brand new content just like this every 5 days. Sit back, do whatever it is that you do to relax, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. Some time ago, I had decided to go on a little personal vacation out into the woods of northern Arizona. I was experiencing a sort malaise that was really messing with my creative flow, and I needed a chance to really knuckle down and just enjoy the natural world again. I had spent 6 days out in the wilderness, just enjoying the feeling of being in nature. But the night of day 7 was one I will never forget. Noise. Something was waking me up. Groggily, I rolled over and looked at my phone. It was ringing. I looked to the top of it and blinked. No signal. That made sense. I had come out here for the isolation, a chance to clear my head and make some music again. So why was my phone ringing? How was my phone ringing? I stared at the number as my phone rang incessantly. An unknown caller. I heaved a tired sigh, swiped to answer, and croaked blearily. Hello? You need to be ready. It knows you're there, and it's already here. It has come for you, came the voice on the other line. Who is this? Who am I speaking to? I asked, the exhaustion beginning to leave my voice. Be ready. It will be there soon. Don't open the door. The line went dead. My phone blinked, and the words, "Signal lost," flashed on the screen. Don't open. I rubbed the sleep from my eyes and wearily watched my phone, waiting to see if it would ring again. I must be losing it, I murmured, placing my phone back on the nightstand and rolling back over to go to sleep. That's when the house thundered. Booming knocks shook the glass of the windows and rattled the glassware. I spun to the door of my room and my mouth dropped. My door was closed, but it was shaking like something was trying to get in. Boom, boom, boom. 3 knocks in short succession thundered against my bedroom door. I didn't remember locking it. The only door I locked was the front. It was the only one I figured I needed to out here. The angered knocking came again. 3 strong blows, and the rattling began anew. It shook the door, and as I watched, I saw the frame begin to crack. My phone rang and the rattling stopped. Sparing a glance, I snatched it off the nightstand and looked at the number. Unknown caller again. Shakily, I swiped to answer the call and brought the phone to my ear, saying nothing. It knows you're in there. It isn't going to be polite for long. Go under the bed. Hide. Then the line went dead again. Signal lost. I looked at the cracking door frame and wasted no time taking this mysterious caller's advice. Quickly, I crawled under the bed and watched. It was only minutes. I knew it was only minutes, but it felt like hours. I stared at the door, terror wrapping its cold arms around my gut. My breathing became ragged as my eyes remained glued to the door. It wasn't moving. There was no knocking. Had the caller been wrong this time? Was it done? Had it just given up? What was it? Questions raced through my skull, each firing out of the cannon of doubt before the next one could be rationalized. Could any of this be rationalized, though? Something had called me up and warned me of something else in my house. Now that something else was just outside my door. I couldn't explain it, but I had this feeling, like whatever it was that was out there was waiting for me to make a move. like we were in some kind of terrible chess game. So I watched. I waited beneath that bed for agonizing minutes. The sounds began shortly after that. Soft scratching noises, almost inaudible from my position. The one my signal-less savior alleged would keep me safe. I never let my gaze drift from the door, and I'm glad I kept it there because watching what happened next defied logic. The door itself began to bulge inward. I could hear the wood splintering at the center, continued to bubble toward me. Then it exploded. Debris and lethal wooden scrap fired through the bedroom. I wasn't spared when this happened. My hiding place provided shelter from the blunt of the door's destruction, but I was peppered with fragments of splintered wood that dug themselves into my skin. I wanted to cry out in pain, but the sight of what was beyond caught the scream in my throat. There, standing in the doorway, I saw a pair of feet, massive legs that must have been at least 3 feet across themselves. But that wasn't the strangest thing. The skin was no tone I had ever seen on a human. It was this mossy green and brown, and the texture was so wooden, like a pair of tree trunks. Slowly the thing in my doorway ambled its way into my room. I could hear its heavy, ragged breaths, like some sort of hunting beast. It was at the foot of my bed. The scent of moss and pine clung heavily to it, but there was another scent I caught as it just stood there. Rot. Death. The pungent odor of decaying meat clung to the creature's wooden legs. I had to cover my nose and mouth to keep from retching as it circled the bed. Was it going to throw it up and pull me out from underneath? Was this monster just waiting for the perfect chance to tear me to shreds? What was it? The feet turned, and suddenly my blood felt like ice. My whole body shivered as the temperature in the room suddenly plummeted. I could see my breath as this thing let out an ear-shattering roar. I can't place the sound, but it reminded me of a mixture between a jet engine's roar and a grizzly bear's growl. I watched from my hiding place as the nightstand was lifted and launched across the room. I could only hear the thing shatter as the creature tore the place apart. My eyes were discs in my head. My hands were clamped over my mouth to hide any sounds of breathing or whimpering. But just as it spun to face the bed, it stopped. Instead, whatever it was turned and shambled out of my room. What the... They were the only words I could choke out as the creature disappeared from my sight. Then the phone rang again. Terrified, I seized it, trying to silence the ring. I swiped to answer the caller, and immediately began to whisper into the phone. What was that? Who are you? How did you know it was coming? There's no time for any of that. It knows where you are. You need to run. Jump out the window and keep running until you lose sight of this place. Keep going until you reach the highway. Don't come back until morning. Are you kidding me? That thing is huge. I can't outrun it. You have to. It's the only way you win this. Then the call cut out. Signal lost. I steadied my breathing and psyched myself up, shooting out from under the bed as I heard that dreadful roar again. It was coming back. I didn't have time to think. No time to find shoes. I bolted toward the now shattered window and dove, slicing my arms and legs against the shards of glass. Adrenaline coursed through my veins, urging me to ignore everything else. I ran, bolted through the forest as fast as my legs would carry me. Twigs and rocks tore into my feet, but I kept going. Even as my chest began to tighten and my lungs began to feel like there was a fire being set beneath them, I ran. I couldn't hear the monster behind me anymore. Maybe it stayed at my cabin. Maybe it kept looking elsewhere. Every ounce of me just hoped I had gotten lucky. But the voice on the phone told me to keep running until I hit the highway. So I did. I ran through miles of backcountry woods, never stopping, pushing myself far beyond anything I thought I was capable of, just to get away from whatever that thing was. I could see darkness starting to push its way into my vision. My legs were beginning to feel like they were made of stone. My body ached and every muscle screamed for me to stop, but I kept pushing. When I burst through the tree line onto the road, I stopped. Almost instantly, I began sobbing and dropped to my knees. I gazed up at the moon as my phone began to ring again. I pulled it out of my pocket and looked at the number. Before I could do anything else, darkness overtook me. I woke the following day in a hospital bed. Apparently, someone had discovered my unconscious and bloodied body on the side of the road. The sheriffs had a million questions, none of which I had a good answer for. They thought my story sounded like something I had made up, but when they went to the cabin, many of them were singing a different tune. "Looks like you got lucky and escaped one of the biggest bears I've ever seen," one of them said. "Didn't find it, but the claw marks in the wood made it look like a dinosaur. Grizzlies are huge, son, but not even they leave marks like that." When I asked about the phone calls, they just shook their heads. "There is no call service that far out. You might have imagined that part and everything." It took me over a week to recover from my injuries. I was told I had lacerated a tendon in my right arm, and that it had never quite functioned the way it had before. That was the arm I used to play guitar, and to this day, there are still certain notes my fingers just can't quite nail anymore. The day of my discharge, I was given the things that they had found me with, and given an escort back to the cabin. The debris was mostly cleaned up by the time I arrived to collect my things, but the damage to the building itself was visible. And the cops were right. Whatever it was that came after me that night must have been massive to leave the marks it did so deep in the wood. I checked my phone as I crossed the threshold of the house to gather my things and sighed. No signal. "Well, thanks, whoever you were," I muttered, gathering what stuff was left after the attack. To this day, I don't know who called me, or what it was that was in that cabin, but frankly, I don't think I want to know. We as a species are creatures of lingering regrets. We constantly think of the things that we didn't do, the opportunities we missed out on, the alternatives to the choices we have made, and the haunting question of, what if? I'm no different, and that is what brings me here to share my experience today. I've had a what if question that has persisted in my head like a broken record. It has lingered in the darkest recesses of my mind like a cockroach, and has continued to fester there to the present day. What if we had just come forward with the truth? The answer to this question is not for the faint of heart. What I am about to describe is just as much a detailed recollection of events as it is a confession. What you choose to believe is entirely up to all of you, but I need the truth to be out there in order to repent. This all started a few months ago when I began communication with the dead. Now, this grave endeavor wasn't in vain, mind you. The main reason I entertained this idea and participated was because I was desperate. You see, I have lost a lot of people in my life. People I wished I could see again and communicate with that were no longer here. What I desired most was closure with my loved ones and friends, and death had taken that from me. That is, until Jane and I were cleaning our basement one day. We were moving some miscellaneous junk strewn about the basement to the garage for donation or the trash. It was nothing more than a typical cleaning project that neither of us wanted to do, but it had to get done. As I was cleaning out a particular corner of the basement, I stumbled upon a box containing a Ouija board. Now, I didn't remember ever purchasing or acquiring a Ouija board, and I know for certain Jane wouldn't have either. She was not a fan of creepy things in the slightest. How it ended up there was a complete mystery. My immediate thought was just to throw it away. There was no reason for us to have it. It's not that I didn't believe in the paranormal or anything. I had an experience years ago that made me a believer. I just didn't think it was an item that should continue to be in our household. That is when a thought crossed my mind. One that I should have never begun to entertain the idea of. What if I could speak with those people I never got a chance to speak with again? This was an idea that intrigued me at the time. Reconnecting with people that were once in my life, and knowing that there was a life beyond death provided a strange comfort to me. I can't explain it, but in that moment, I felt like I was compelled to use the board once I had found it. After pondering things for a moment longer, I had made my decision. In hindsight, I should not have made a decision of such magnitude so recklessly, but regardless, my mind was made up. I placed the Ouija board back where I had found it, pretending that I hadn't seen it, and proceeded to go about my day, acting as if I hadn't seen anything. Tomorrow when I got home from work and while my wife was still working, I would use the Ouija board, and that is exactly what I did. From that day forward for months, I spent that 2-hour time period before Jane would get home from work downstairs in the basement communicating with the deceased. My usage of the Ouija board granted me the ability to being able to talk to my mother, my father, my grandmother, and grandfather, and anyone else I so desired to talk to. We discussed the afterlife, my life, and what I had never gotten to when they were here on this soil. It was a relief unlike any other, and I was grateful to be able to break the barrier between the living and dead to talk to my loved ones. It began so innocently with them. All I ever intended was to talk to them and to get some closure, but it became an addiction. I couldn't stop using the Ouija board. Over time, I had started inviting random spirits to conduct a conversation with me. It became therapeutic for me when I would ask these spirits questions and learn about them in addition to the unknown and beyond. Despite my morbid fixation on conversing with the dead, I never let anything get out of hand. My habit was always restricted to that 2-hour window I had, and I was always going to be in control of the situation. Yesterday, though, that all changed. I was going about things like I normally did with the Ouija board. The candles that circled me illuminated the basement as I was called out. Are there any spirits here that want to communicate at this time? My words echoed through the basement as I patiently awaited a response from beyond the grave. Some time had passed before the planchette I had my hands placed over began to shake. Slowly, it moved over to the word yes. I nodded my head and inquired, "Who am I speaking to?" Once more the planchette began to move and glided over the letters G, R, A, C, and E. I felt myself grow cold as if I had stepped 1 foot into a meat locker. My eyes widened in horror. That name. Grace, why are you communicating with me? My words hung in the air like a fog as I anxiously waited for the spirit to answer. I could feel my heart pulsating very fast, and I did my best to take deep breaths to slow its frantic pace. A moment later, the planchette moved to a series of letters that spelled out the word return. Return? What do you mean by this? I inquired, my eyes darting around in the darkness surrounding the candles I had lit. Silence overcast the basement, and nothing was heard besides the thunderous thumping of my heart. I had never experienced anything like this in the months I had used the Ouija board. I had never felt such an ominous and dark energy that contaminated the room like a plague. I glanced back down at the planchette, wondering if there was ever going to be a response when a gust of wind snuffed out the candles. I blindly looked around, the darkness enveloping my vision as I felt the perspiration from my forehead from fright. It felt like I was being watched, but by who I could not tell. It was a feeling that lurked as I felt an icy, cold hand grip my shoulder. I stood still as a statue, rooted to the spot in horror as a voice whispered a command into my ear. Run. That's when my adrenaline kicked in, and I bolted up the stairs. I closed the basement door behind me and went up to Jane and I's room to hide and calm down. I didn't move from my place in our bedroom until Jane had come back home from work. I didn't dare tell her what had occurred. The last thing I wanted to feel was unsafe and scared in the comfort of our home. I collected myself and went downstairs to greet her, and resumed the evening like it was any other. When it was time to call it a night, I waited for her to go upstairs before going back down and hiding the Ouija board. I would take care of its disposal in the morning while Jane still slept. In the meantime, however, I was going to catch some much-needed rest and put this whole bizarre fixation of mine behind me. I promised myself from that moment onward I would never communicate with the dead ever again. My weird addiction to the Ouija board had to end for the sake of my sanity and well-being. The room was painfully quiet in the early hours of the morning, almost as if time itself had stopped entirely. Darkness cloaked the room like a massive blanket as I lay next to Jane. A faint light creeped in through the window, allowing for little visibility of the various pieces of furniture in the bedroom. My eyes scanned the room for a moment for any anomalies before resting my gaze upon her. She was still sound asleep, her breathing rhythmic as she continued to dream in peace. Her arms were wrapped around me lightly like vines on a tree trunk. I slowly wiggled free from her grasp and rolled on my side. I was still in a dazed state, my eyelids fighting a losing battle to stay open as I became self-aware of my heart beating against my rib cage. It thudded rapidly, like I had just been engulfed in a nightmare. I couldn't remember if I had been dreaming or not, but it must not have been important if I couldn't remember, right? That's what I told myself as I closed my eyes and wrapped myself back into the sheets like a cocoon. I lay still for a while, waiting for sleep to overtake my conscience. When it seemed as though I was about to doze off, my cell phone that was on my nightside table lit up like a Christmas tree and began to ring. The vibration of the device buzzing on the table grated my eardrums as I let out a groan of frustration. I sluggishly reached out and silenced the phone without even acknowledging who it was. I turned to my wife to see if she had stirred at all, but thankfully to my delight, she had not been ripped from her slumber. I breathed a sigh of relief as I looked at the time. 3:03 a.m. Give me a break. I muttered irritably to myself as I turned back over, hoping to get some sleep. The idea of having to go to work on just a couple hours of sleep was not a pleasant thought. The last thing I wanted to do was daydream about dreaming. I closed my eyes and tried my best to silence my thoughts, but not even a moment after I had nestled into the warm embraces of the sheets, the phone rang again. My eyes shot open, and I lunged out into the void of darkness to silence the phone. Good God, can I just get some rest? I buried my head under the blanket and face planted into the pillow, not wanting to think, see, or hear anything until 6 a.m. sharp when I absolutely had to be awake. The sound of my phone going off seconds after my face connected with the pillow indicated that someone was still trying to get in touch with me. I begrudgingly lifted my face from the pillow and squinted to look at my phone, which shone like a beacon of light on the bedside table. I exhaled angrily as I yanked the phone from its place on the table and stared down at the screen. My heart immediately sunk as I read the name of the person who was vehemently blowing up my phone. Grace. It was the same name that was spelt out on the Ouija board earlier. I was confused. How was a spirit contacting me outside of the board? Was this the spirit that I thought it was? I chalked it up to it all being a strange coincidence and put that dreadful thought to rest. I hit decline on the call, and not even a second after I did, the phone began to ring again. This person doesn't give up. I thought as I pressed decline call. The phone lit up and hummed violently as Grace continued to call again and again. I promptly kept declining the calls as they came through, and I was able to eventually block the person, resulting in a blissful silence falling upon the room. I gently placed the phone back down and was about to lay back down when I noticed Jane sitting up, looking at me in pure confusion. In the midst of all the chaos, I neglected the fact that the constant noise of my phone and I would have woken her. "What's going on?" she asked as a yawn escaped her lips. "Nothing, Jane. It was just some stupid scam caller or something. I took care of it." I reassured as I turned to my place beside her in the comfort of our bed. As soon as she and I began to get comfortable, the familiar humming sound filled the air, indicating that my phone was going off. "Apparently you didn't," she quipped as I snatched the phone from its resting place and messed with its settings. I was perplexed. I had blocked this person, so how was the same number calling? I decided to take matters a step further and turn my phone off. I held the power button on my phone and watched the brand logo light up on the screen before dimming and blacking out completely. There, now I did. I breathed a sigh of relief as I returned to Jane's side and gave a light smile. That was way more complicated than it needed to be. We shared a laugh as we both lay on our backs and snuggled together under the sheets. "I noticed. Seems like you got a stalker," she teased as she wrapped her arms around my torso and placed her head on my chest. "Who wants to stalk someone like me, though?" "I don't know. You tell me." She raised her head to look me in the face and raised a slight brow jokingly. In that moment, I wanted to tell her the person's name, but decided it was better to withhold the information. There was no need to bother her with something as small as a name in the grand scheme of things. Before I could give a reply to her question, though, my phone rang yet again. This time Jane and I both sat straight up in bed, immediately alarmed at what we were hearing. You turned that off, right?" she asked with a concerned tone, her face peering over at my bedside table. "Yeah, I turned the phone off. Did you not see me turn the phone off?" I felt like my arms weighed 1,000 tons, and my fingers shook as I took the phone and brought it to my face. I stood there and just stared at the brightly lit screen, the name Grace striking fear into my heart. "Grace? Who is this Grace, and why is she calling you? It's 3 a.m, Jane said, clearly agitated and suspicious of the fact that another woman was calling me in the early hours of the morning. "I don't know, but I'm going to answer and figure out what the meaning of this is." I pressed accept on the phone call and brought it up to my ear. "Listen, I don't know who you think you are, but..." I was interrupted by a burst of static that sounded like a radio trying to find a proper frequency. "Hello? Is anybody there?" I asked as I glanced over my shoulder at Jane, who appeared to be a nervous wreck. She looked how I felt internally, but I needed to be strong for her. I didn't want to look scared, but it was hard not to be. This whole thing was certainly strange. "Put it on speaker." Her voice trembled with a worried tone. I nodded my head and pulled the phone away from my ear. I pressed the speaker button, and we both listened with racing hearts as the static continued to blare. This noise persisted for a while before a faint voice crept through. "Hello?" The voice was weak, but there was no mistaking it. Someone was on the line. "Yes, hello? Who is this? How did you get my number?" The questions poured out of me at a rapid-fire pace as I was trying to rationalize the scenario we found ourselves in. There was no response to anything I asked, and instead we were left to listen to the static, deafeningly sounding from the speaker. The moments we spent waiting for a response seemed to drag on in dog years, but eventually the voice returned. This time, much clearer. "This is Grace." I felt my blood turn to ice. Every word pierced my skin like a hunting knife as I looked over at Jane, who shared the same horrified expression as myself. I felt my grip loosening on the phone as the words seemingly spun around me. This couldn't be real. None of this is real. "Leave us alone." Jane's voice broke the silence between the two of us. She seized the phone from what little grasp I still had and tried to decline the call. No matter how many times she attempted to hang up, though, the phone call would not end. If anything, the static sound got louder and louder, forcing Jane and I to cover our ears. As quickly as the static noise raised itself to ear-piercing decibels, it stopped. Jane and I were afraid to breathe as we listened to the phone for any signs of life besides our own. I could feel my limbs trembling from the fear and adrenaline. I was afraid to move in any capacity. I clenched my eyes shut and prayed for this to end. I could feel Jane's face hovering above my shoulder, and I could hear her trying to stifle cries of terror. The silence on the other end of the line was somehow more deafening than the static coming through just moments ago. It was not to last, however, as the voice returned and spoke clear as day from the other end of the line. "I'm here." The voice stated in an aggressive rasp before the phone call suddenly ended and the screen went to black. Jane and I sat in the darkness, paralyzed by our own fear. We weren't sure of what to make of what just happened. It felt like a piece of fiction had come to life. There was nothing fictitious about this, however. This was the gravity of the situation coming crashing down upon us. There was a reason why that name had sounded so familiar earlier downstairs with the Ouija board. The voice on the phone all but confirmed our suspicions. She and I locked eyes in horror, and I felt myself shiver at the revelation. The spirit from the Ouija board and the voice on the phone were the same entity. It was Grace. Our daughter we had killed. I know that asking for help is a difficult thing for many people. I, luckily, am not usually worried about doing that. For me, asking for help is so fun. Taking on a challenge with another person instantly makes it all worth doing. Or, if it's more of a problem than just a challenge, it gives me the opportunity to get an outside perspective instead of feeling so overwhelmed. But right now I can't ask anyone I know for help. It's not the sort of problem I can ask friends to help with without sounding crazy. So I need your help to decide. Should I go into my girlfriend's art studio? So, for context, my girlfriend is an artist. A really, really good artist. Painting, sculpting, crochet. She does anything that she felt she had to do to express herself. And honestly, not to seem entirely materialistic, but the money she would get from commissions or selling her pieces gives us the needed leeway so that I could find a job I liked, instead of one that pays a ton but is super soul-destroying. I work at a theme park, and I won't name for internet safety, but I work in the entertainment department, in a dinosaur show. pretending to be a Steve Irwin type of character, but less cool and more of a lesbian. So overall, this setup is awesome. Now that you understand all that, it's time to get into the actual issue. There are 2 months of the year that I don't work due to the fact that the park is closed in the months following New Year. I thought, perhaps, earlier this year during my extended break, that I'd get to hang out with my girlfriend, catch up on all the horror movies I've been recommended, and hopefully, if timing's allowed, propose to the love of my life. It was 2 weeks in that I realized that despite working from home, my girlfriend spends her entire life in her studio, which is a spare downstairs bedroom we converted for her. From 8:30 a.m. to 7, 8, or sometimes even 9 p.m. at night, she's working on her latest project. I decided, seeing as she's working so hard, to try and paint her something. It wasn't great. It was a worm that became an astronaut, floating in space. She likes that sort of thing. I felt like 10 minutes was an okay amount of time to distract her, so I approached the studio door and knocked. The first thing I noticed was that my knocks echoed. Faint rumblings rippled out from the door into the walls. I swear I didn't hit it that hard. I'm actually super weak. Usually she would have responded by now, so I faintly called her name. Lucy, Lucy. Footloose? Can I come in? I heard a very faint reply from inside. I couldn't hear if she said yes or no, but I was honestly starting to get worried, and I slowly opened the door. I stepped into a world unknown to me. The entire room was filled with trees, vast trees that, through what I hope was forced perspective, formed a great canopy about 40 feet above my head. A giant elephant stood in the middle of the room, completely motionless, frozen in time. I know deep down that it's just a statue, but even deeper down lies the fear that it wasn't. The worst part of this jungle was the heat. I don't know how she got it to be this temperature. I didn't see the window. Behind the wooden trees that seemed to go on and on for rows behind this. Despite the enormity of my surroundings, I was still deeply aware that this was in the space of one medium-sized room, and that combination seemed to make this vast jungle scene incredibly claustrophobic. How did she make this? How was she gonna get it out? All these thoughts echoed in my head like the knocks on the door. I decided, unnecessarily cautious as it may seem, to creep my way behind the elephant, to make my way toward the walk-in closet she used for her art supplies, and get her to stop hiding. I start my 10-foot trek, but I swear I hear bird calls, and I immediately stop. Must be a speaker. In the corner of my eye, I see a figure, not human, dark and sleek, leaping from the treetop with a glint of white teeth. I was frozen in place. It's only when I heard a growl that I turned around. Nothing. Must have been the heat making me crazy. I got to the far wall and demanded she come out of the closet. Not like that. The door opened, and where I expected to find my smug girlfriend, I saw a tunnel. My brain swam with endless thoughts. Why is there a tunnel in my closet? How did I not know? What is that behind me? Before I realized what I was doing, I ran into the tunnel and slammed the door behind me, hoping that whatever big cat I hallucinated can't open doors. I walked into the tunnel, illuminating it with my phone torch and hoping the light would cast over my girlfriend, so I could get at least some answers. Unlike the studio, this room was cold and damp. The walls are dark gray and stony, like a cave, and I felt gross putting my hands on them, as they dripped with condensation or worse. I got to what I'd say in hindsight was about halfway through when I saw it. A human leg, half-eaten and pooling with dark red blood that slunk towards me as if there was a slight incline. I stepped towards it, and it's only when I'm about 2 feet away that I realize what I'm seeing. Crochet. She crocheted a human leg somehow and put it here to frighten me. That's one problem with that explanation, though. The red liquid pooling from it. I decided now to call her name again. She answers me. "Oh hey babe, I'm in here, just at the end of the tunnel. Don't worry, you're safe. All the limbs are fake." I realized then that about 10 feet ahead of me, the entire floor was full of these crocheted body parts, and I'd have to climb them to get to her. That would be fine. What wouldn't be was the smell. I don't know how, but these fake woolen limbs smelled like they were supposed to be. Intense scents of rotting meat and decay emanated from their soft, woven skin, and all of them felt wet. I climbed over them and crawled into the room where Lucy waited. This room was genuinely huge. Not fake, large like the jungle. I had entered a giant barn, constructed with wooden planks. It seemed to go up higher than any barn I'd ever seen, a hollow skyscraper, and I could tell through the orange sunlight peeking in through the gaps in the wood that it was nearing sundown. I checked my phone. It was 2 p.m. The thing I immediately noticed was the floor, as the hay hurt my hands when I crawled in over the limbs. The entire floor was made of hay, some places woven together, and seemingly stable enough to support mine and Lucy's weight, and the rest being large pools of loose hay. I'm about to ask Lucy what's happening when I see its head poking out of the hay pool in the center of the room. It's completely hairless and rounded, like the end of a hot dog, with pale, clammy skin. Its thin, lipless mouth reaches from ear to ear, or at least if it had ears it would have. 2 tusks reached upwards out his mouth at about 45 degrees, and the tips of them were level with its pig-like snout. The worst part, however, was above the nose. It had human eyes, astoundingly blue. Clearly human, but with none of the empathy or understanding you'd see from a member of our species. I couldn't see anything below its neck. What is this, Lucy? What is going on with any of this? I'm so confused. I just wanted to bring you this painting, but now I'm in this place. That's a very nice drawing, baby. I can put it up in the angel room. Do you want to meet the angels I've made? Her smile seemed genuine, like she had no idea why I was so concerned. I couldn't handle it. No, Lucy, I just want to go back. I just don't understand how this could even fit in our... Can this thing stop looking at me? She only said one thing. Oh, Ellie, that's just the bull. Before I had a chance to ask what kind of bulls have ever looked like that, it started to stand up. As hay toppled from its huge body, so did skin falling onto the floor, revealing giant, pulsing musculature that formed this hulking nightmare. I'm sure some of the freaks out there are wondering, so I'll just say now. I didn't see its genitals. I turned and ran, scrambling into the tunnel behind me and dropping my painting so I had both hands free. I could hardly focus on anything as I heard its squeals and roars behind me. I climbed over the limb pile, but I feel it touch my leg, and I jump. I fully hit my face on the stone floor and passed out. When I woke up, I was on the sofa. Lucy sat next to me with painkillers. After we checked Google to see if I had a concussion, we had a serious talk. I explained my plan to propose, and that I don't know if I can marry her if she keeps eldritch horrors and impossible spaces in our house. She promised to explain everything to me if I gave her 6 months to finish the project. Well, now it's approaching that time, and honestly my life returned completely to normal. The only change being that I don't go into her studio. So, I'm just hoping anyone could help me decide whether or not to see the finished product. I honestly really like I, 23 female, have been in a wheelchair all my life. Or at least it felt like it. My mom had told me that when I was young, maybe 6 or so, I had some accident in a lake nearby in Charleston, Texas that left my lower half paralyzed. We had to move soon after because my dad found a new job in New York that made a whole lot more money, according to him. I never understood why he would always harp on that, since it seemed obvious to me that anyone would switch jobs if they'd been given an upwards of 50% pay raise. Anyways, the whole point of that was just to say that I've moved back to Charleston, much to the chagrin of my parents who wanted me to stay close to them. I was able to scrape up enough money to buy a used car and gas to drive down there. I have ample mobility in my feet to drive, while also having enough to afford the down payment on a house where I was looking at online. Obviously, since I'm not able to spend too much time on my feet, I opted for a single-story house, which would also be a lot cheaper. When I arrived in Charleston, I headed over to the office to sign some paperwork regarding the house and whether or not I'd take out a mortgage. I rolled myself into the elevator and pressed 6. When the elevator doors began to close, I heard a voice call out, "Hey, hold the door for me." I stuck my foot between the doors and a large man came stumbling in. I don't mean to judge a person by their appearance, but quite frankly, he looked like the epitome of a deadbeat. His hair was unkempt, he reeked of sweat, and looked as if he hadn't bathed in days. What put me off the most, however, was his clean-shaven face that didn't fit the rest of his body. If you were to only look at his face, it seemed like a grown baby. Regardless, I felt uncomfortable being in an elevator with him. His stench immediately made the air grow heavy right when he stepped in, and I felt disgusted with every breath I took. I almost felt bad for being so repulsed by a stranger I had known less than 10 seconds. But his later actions would make me feel no more guilt. When the man walked into the elevator, he was in a bit of a daze. It only took him a few seconds, however, before he looked down and saw me. He smirked, and I swore I heard him chuckle too. Before the doors finally closed, he looked towards the shining 6 button. I could feel my heart sink when he pressed the buttons for every single floor before it. I wanted to close my eyes so bad, thinking he'd do something for me. Fortunately, it seemed all he wanted to do was talk. Unfortunately, he wanted to talk. "So, where are you from?" "Oh, just New York." I wanted to slap myself for telling him the truth. My parents taught me countless lessons in stranger danger, and I had already broken the most important rule. "New York, eh? Then you must be quite the big shot, huh?" The elevator reached floor 2. "No, not really. There's a lot of normal people there, too." "I see. What's your name?" I caught myself. "Samantha." The elevator reached floor 3. "That's a beautiful name." He thought about it for a second. "I like it. Mine's Jerry." The elevator reached floor 4. "You seem to be new here. It's a great town, but can be a bit dangerous, especially for a young lady such as yourself. It's important to have a man nearby." The elevator reached floor 5. He took out a piece of paper that appeared to be stained with coffee or something brown and wrote something on it. Then he folded the paper and tucked it into my shirt pocket, making no effort to avoid touching my chest. The elevator finally reached floor 6. I had never been more relieved to get out of a conversation before. I wheeled myself out of the elevator as fast as I could. I made sure not to look back. I could feel Jerry's gaze burning into the back of my neck. I don't know why, but I imagined he was smiling as well. "Hi, Sarah. It's good to see you today." I was a bit startled to hear someone call my name out like that. Then I remembered I had to put my name on the application to have the meeting in the first place. I simply smiled and greeted her back. It's good to meet you too. Cheryl, she filled in. It's good to meet you too, Cheryl. Cheryl looked to be in her late 50s. She had quite a few gray hairs here and there as well as wrinkles. However, she still had more than enough youth left in her. She was quite excited to hand me all the forms and paperwork I needed to sign. She was even thoughtful enough to bring me a shorter table to sign everything on. Everything was done with a cheerful smile on her face. It was comforting. I was over 1,000 miles away from my old life, and I had just experienced one of the creepiest moments in my life so far. Having someone treat me like a child felt more reassuring than patronizing at that moment. When I finished filling out and signing everything, I found myself talking casually with her. Maybe a bit too casually. Thanks so much for the help, Mom. It took a while for me to realize what I just said, and I wish I didn't. I could feel my face getting red with embarrassment. Cheryl looked at me with a sympathetic look in her eyes. Oh, babe, if you ever need a mama or a hug, you know where to find me. I nodded and left the office with a smile on my face. Before I left the room, I heard Cheryl call out, "Oh, and good luck." Thanks. Didn't know what she was saying good luck for. I assumed it was a southern thing. I arrived at my house very late that night. The house looked a lot bigger than what it should have been, to the point I was worried I arrived at the wrong house. I tried using the house key I was given, and, to my surprise, it worked. The interior of the house seemed to fit that of a single story. The ceiling was quite low, but it wouldn't be a problem, considering I wouldn't be standing very often. The first thing someone would see if they were to walk in would be a short hallway leading to a living room area. There was a kitchen to the left of the living room, and a bedroom to the right. Connected to the bedroom was a relatively spacious bathroom. There were only 2 or 3 closets and a backyard as well, and the flooring was carpet besides the kitchen and bathroom. I didn't bring anything with me on my drive to Charleston besides a few snacks, drinks, and an air mattress. I would have to buy some furniture later. I changed my clothes, making sure to toss the piece of paper Jerry gave me, and plugged the inflating machine into an outlet and inserted its tip into the mattress. That's when I heard something strange. Thump. I thought I was imagining things, so I tried ignoring it. Thump. It sounded even louder this time. Thump. I turned off the inflator and listened more closely this time. It sounded like footsteps? That couldn't be right. It's a single-story house, and the sound came from what would have been upstairs. I decided to ignore the sound and continued inflating the mattress until it was full. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept hearing the thuds and thumping all throughout the night. I couldn't take it anymore. The noises pounded in my ear, and my heart raced every time I heard them. I kept having intrusive thoughts that maybe these sounds really were footsteps, which only put me further on edge. I got out of bed and wobbled around the house. My legs were weak, and I thought I'd be able to get around the house and find the source of my distress before my legs gave out on me. My first thought was that there was some kind of machinery or piping in the ceiling, but the sounds felt too irregular to be any of those. My second thought was an animal on the roof. Maybe a raccoon or possum, but the roofing tiles were ceramic and would have sounded more like a clang. Unfortunately, my mind was too tired to think any further than those 2 reasons. So I looked around the house instead, hoping I'd see something that might explain something. My little search ended up leading to more questions than answers. I ended up going through almost every single space in the house. Almost. I remembered the online listing for the house saying there was a space made for a washer and dryer to be installed, but I didn't remember seeing it. The website said the room was connected to the bedroom, so I went back there. After a quick break on the mattress, I got back to searching. I wanted to sleep badly, but the thumping was keeping me up, and honestly, so was my curiosity. It only took a few minutes of active searching until I finally found it. There was no knob, but rather a hook that jutted only slightly out of the wall. No one would have been able to tell there was a door there, if they didn't look closely enough to see the outline of one. The only reason I noticed it was because I cut myself on the hook after leaning on the wall to get some rest. I put my ear to the wall, and I knew I had solved the mystery. The sound was much louder there than anywhere else in the house. I gently gripped the hook. Before I could open the door, I felt a great sense of dread. It was as if my body was telling me that I shouldn't see what's behind the door. Looking back on it now, I should have listened. Against my better judgment, I opened the door. There was a set of stairs. What the? I was bewildered. There wasn't anything wrong with the stairs. It wasn't like it was covered in blood or anything. It was just a normal staircase made out of carpet. It's just the placement was so odd. I couldn't tell what was more strange, finding a set of stairs in a single-story house, or the fact that the stairs didn't lead anywhere. I'm serious. It didn't lead anywhere, just straight into the wall. It was like the builders thought they were building something else, realized their mistake but were too lazy to take it down, and just covered it up. I even went up the stairs thinking there was another secret hook, but nothing was there. What was even worse was that the noises persisted. At that point, I grew too tired and a bit scared to deal with whatever was happening. I closed the door and collapsed onto my bed. I didn't sleep well that night. My mind was running, attempting to understand the things that happened that day, but it couldn't. The worst part was that I suddenly felt like someone was watching me. I can't remember if it was part of a dream, or I guess a nightmare, but when I rolled over in bed, I could see the stairs peeking from behind the door. The next few weeks went a lot better. I was able to purchase all my furniture and get it moved into the house. The house was starting to feel a lot more like a home. Sleeping became much better as well. Along with having an actual bed instead of an air mattress, the thumping stopped. I guessed opening the hook door released some air pressure in the room, which must have been circulating for who knows how long. I felt safe. That feeling would only last momentarily. It seemed to be a normal day. I was planning on going on a big grocery shopping trip since I received my first paycheck from my new job that allowed me to work from home. I opened the front door before I realized I forgot to grab my reserved parking permit. I locked the door before I started looking for it. Locking doors sort of became a habit for me since back where I lived in NYC. Not locking your doors was an invitation for strangers to walk in, even if you were home. As I was shuffling through the drawer in the kitchen, that's when I heard it again. The thumping. Thump, thump, thump. It sounded like someone was walking down a set of stairs. Thump, thump, thump. The sound suddenly got louder and I started getting scared. There was no logical explanation for my fear, but my instincts were telling me I needed to hide. I started panicking. The sound was getting louder and my wheelchair kept slipping on the kitchen tiles. I abandoned the wheelchair and crawled as fast as I could into the shoe closet, compressing my body so I could fit. Creak. I heard a door open, and another creak. Another door opened. It sounded closer. I was terrified. I've left my phone in the kitchen and had no other way to get help, and now someone or something was opening all the doors to my house. It was only a matter of time before they'd find me. I shut my eyes tight. I heard more doors open. Then I heard the kitchen sink turn on. Suddenly, all the sound stopped. I waited for a few minutes before peeking out the closet door. I couldn't see anything. I took a deep breath and shoved the door open. There was nothing there. All the doors were closed. Even the front door was still locked. I let out a loud laugh. I was stressed for no reason. I stumbled out of the closet, grabbed my phone and parking tag, and sat down in my wheelchair ready to leave. Before I went out, I took a quick glance behind me and my heart dropped. The kitchen faucet was still dry. It started as a simple road trip. I had a few days off work and decided to drive across the state to visit an old friend. The plan was to take the scenic route, avoid the interstates, and enjoy the open road. I had my GPS set, snacks packed, and a playlist ready. It was supposed to be a relaxing drive, but somewhere along the way, I took a wrong turn. And that's when everything changed. I had been driving for hours when my GPS started acting up. The screen flickered, and the route kept circulating. Frustrated, I pulled over to the side of the road to reset it. I was in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by dense woods and the occasional farmhouse. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the road. After fiddling with the GPS for a few minutes, it finally seemed to be working again. It rerouted me down a narrow, winding road that I didn't remember seeing on the map, but I trusted the technology more than my own sense of direction, so I followed it. The road grew narrower and the trees thicker as I drove on. The sunlight faded, and a thick fog began to roll in, reducing visibility to just a few feet in front of my car. I turned on my headlights and slowed down, hoping I would find a way back to the main road soon. After what felt like an eternity, the fog lifted slightly, revealing an old, rusted sign by the side of the road. "Welcome to Ravenwood." I had never heard of this place, and a quick glance at my GPS showed no record of it. Still, the idea of a small town where I could get my bearings and maybe ask for directions was appealing. I drove into Ravenwood and immediately felt a chill run down my spine. The town looked like it had been abandoned for years. The buildings were old and decaying, windows boarded up or broken. Weeds grew through the cracks in the pavement, and there wasn't a single car or person in sight. I parked my car in front of what used to be a diner and got out. The air was cold and damp, and the silence was almost deafening. I decided to check the diner first, hoping to find someone who could tell me where I was and how to get back on track. The door to the diner creaked loudly as I pushed it open. Inside, it was dark and musty. The tables and chairs were covered in a thick layer of dust, and the smell of mold hung in the air. I called out, but there was no response. The place was empty. Feeling uneasy, I decided to leave and try another building. Across the street was a small grocery store. The windows were covered in grime, but I could see faint light flickering inside. I crossed the street and tried the door. It was locked. As I stood there contemplating my next move, I heard a sound behind me. I turned around, but there was no one there. Just the empty street and the fog slowly creeping back in. My heart was racing now. Something was very wrong with this place. I walked back to my car, the feeling of being watched growing stronger with each step. I decided to leave Ravenwood and find another route, but as I reached for the car door, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. My car tires were slashed. Panic set in. I was stranded in an abandoned town with no way out. I pulled out my phone to call for help, but there was no signal. Desperate, I decided to search the town for a working phone or someone who could help me. I walked through the empty streets, the sense of dread growing with each step. Every building I tried was either locked or empty. The town was a ghost town, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. As I approached the town square, I saw a figure standing in the middle of the road. It was a man, tall and thin, dressed in old-fashioned clothes. He was staring directly at me. I called out to him, but he didn't respond. He just stood there motionless. I approached cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. When I was about 10 feet away, the man turned and walked down an alleyway. I hesitated for a moment before deciding to follow him. He was the first sign of life I had seen, and I needed answers. The alleyway was narrow and dark, the walls covered in peeling paint and graffiti. The man was nowhere to be seen. As I walked deeper into the alley, I heard whispers all around me, faint and indistinct. I spun around, but there was no one there. My footsteps echoed in the narrow space, and the whispers grew louder. They seemed to be coming from all directions. I quickened my pace, hoping to reach the end of the alley and find the man, but instead, I found myself in front of an old, decrepit church. The door to the church was slightly ajar, and a faint light glowed from inside. I pushed the door open and stepped in. The interior was dark and cold, the pews covered in dust and cobwebs. At the far end of the church, near the altar, I saw the man kneeling in prayer. I approached him slowly, my footsteps echoing in the silent church. As I got closer, I noticed that he was whispering something under his breath. I couldn't make out the words, but they sent a shiver down my spine. "Excuse me?" I said, my voice trembling. "Can you help me? I'm lost." The man stopped whispering and slowly turned his head to look at me. His eyes were empty and hollow, and his face was gaunt and pale. He didn't say anything, just stared at me with those vacant eyes. I took a step back, fear gripping me. "Please, I need help," I repeated. The man stood up slowly, his movements stiff and unnatural. He pointed towards the back of the church, where a door led to what looked like a small office. Without a word, he walked towards the door and disappeared inside. I hesitated for a moment before following him. The office was small and cluttered, with old books and papers strewn everywhere. The man was standing by a desk, looking at an old rotary phone. He picked it up and handed it to me. I took the phone, relieved to finally have a way to call for help. I dialed 911, but there was no dial tone. The line was dead. I looked at the man, but he just stared at me with those empty eyes. "Is there another phone?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. He shook his head slowly and pointed to a piece of paper on the desk. I picked it up and saw that it was a map of the town. There was a red X marked on a building near the edge of town. Scribbled next to the X were the words, "Help here." I looked back at the man, but he was gone. The office door was closed and I was alone. My hands were shaking as I folded the map and put it in my pocket. I had no choice but to go to the marked building and hope for the best. I left the church and followed the map to the edge of town. The building marked with the red X was an old factory, its windows broken and walls covered in ivy. The front door was slightly open, and I could see a faint light inside. I entered the factory, the air thick with dust and the smell of decay. The light was coming from a room at the far end of the building. I made my way through the dark, empty halls, the whispers following me every step of the way. When I reached the room, I saw a group of people standing in a circle. They were dressed in the same old-fashioned clothes as the man in the church, and they were all whispering the same indistinct words. In the center of the circle was a large, ornate mirror. One of the people, a woman with long, dark hair, looked up as I entered. She smiled, but it was a cold, empty smile that sent chills down my spine. "Welcome," she said in a voice that echoed unnaturally. "We've been waiting for you." I took a step back, but the door behind me slammed shut. The people in the circle began to chant louder, their voices rising in a haunting melody. The mirror in the center of the room started to glow, a faint blue light emanating from its surface. "Please, I just want to leave," I pleaded, my voice barely audible over the chanting. The woman stepped forward, her smile never wavering. "You can't leave," she said. "Not yet. You have to see." She grabbed my arm and pulled me towards the mirror. I tried to resist, but her grip was surprisingly strong. As I got closer, I saw my reflection in the mirror, but it was distorted and twisted. My face looked gaunt and hollow, my eyes empty and lifeless. "What is this?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. The woman leaned in close, her breath cold against my ear. "This is the truth," she whispered. "This is who you are." I tried to pull away, but the chanting grew louder and the mirror's light intensified. I felt a cold, dark presence envelop me, and my vision started to blur. The last thing I saw before everything went black was my reflection in the mirror, smiling back at me with that same empty, hollow smile. When I woke up, I was lying on the side of the road, my car parked nearby. The sun was rising and the fog had lifted. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding. Was it all just a dream? I checked my car and, to my relief, the tires were intact. My phone had a signal and the GPS was working fine. I quickly got in the car and drove away, not daring to look back. As I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The memories of Ravenwood haunted me, and I couldn't get the image of my distorted reflection out of my mind. Eventually, I reached my friend's house, but I didn't tell anyone about what happened. Who would believe me? Days passed, but the experience lingered in my thoughts. One night, I found an old box of family photos while rummaging through the attic. As I sifted through the pictures, one in particular caught my eye. It was a sepia-toned photograph of a small town that looked eerily familiar. In the background, I could see a sign that read, Ravenwood. In the foreground stood a group of people dressed in old-fashioned clothes, their faces hauntingly vacant. My heart nearly stopped when I recognized one of the faces. It was the woman from the factory, her cold, empty smile unmistakable. Standing next to her with the same hollow eyes was a younger version of the man from the church. And there, in the middle of the group, was a boy with a familiar face. It was me. I dropped the photo, my hands trembling. The realization hit me like a cold wave. Ravenwood wasn't just a random, sinister town. It was part of my past, a forgotten piece of my history, and somehow it had called me back. To this day, I don't know what Ravenwood truly is or why it isn't on any map, but one thing is certain, it's part of me, and I'll never escape its haunting presence. As I look into the mirror now, I sometimes catch a glimpse of that empty, hollow smile, and I wonder if one day I'll find myself back in Ravenwood, where I truly belong. Lately, I've been having trouble keeping a consistent sleep schedule. I'm sure plenty of other 20-somethings can relate. Every time I manage to fall asleep at a good time, I'll stay up a little bit later the next night, and so on and so forth. Until once again I'm waking up at 5 p.m. and going down at 7 a.m. As I have no girlfriend or job or goals in life, it really hasn't been a problem I've been keen on fixing. Anyway, cut to another sleepless night, and I realize I have literally no clean clothes. I live in the middle of hot Arizona, so even someone who doesn't go outside often ends up with pit stains in his shirts. Plus the grease from wiping my meals on my jeans was getting a bit thick too. So, genius that I am, I decide to go on a laundry run. My apartment complex has a laundry room a short walk away from my building, so washing my clothes at the dead of night isn't the most insane idea, but of course that doesn't keep me from feeling creeped out on the walk there. You know that feeling. Being in the middle of the city, way past a reasonable person's curfew, when it's dark and quiet, and you feel like you're the only person there. You know you aren't, though. The city has a population of several million, and you're in the middle of an apartment complex of over 50 units. That sense of quiet feels fake, that loneliness misleading. It sort of feels like you're doing something wrong, or you're somewhere you aren't supposed to be, but you can't logically put a feeling on why. Anyway, that's how I felt as I took the short walk to the laundry room. The laundry facility itself is actually outside of the gated community, for some reason, so I had to go through said gate to get there. When you're doing this after midnight, you feel like a complete a-hole, or at least I did. It's one of those cheap metal gates with this new lock that opens with an app on your phone. So in addition to the loud, rusty sounding creak of the gate opening, and the echoing slam of it shutting, there's also an obnoxious sound when it unlocks. Compared to the eerie silence of the sleeping city, it seems like the loudest noise that could be. It feels like you might wake your neighbors, or alert something else in the quiet dark to your location. It's the city, so of course it wasn't that dark. The street lights everywhere to try and create some semblance of safety. Even so, the fluorescent white lights of the laundry room felt like a relief when I stepped in from the dark, quiet, hot night air. Turning the washing machine and hearing those thumps and electric hums felt even better. I felt a weird comfort in there, like I was in a confined, safe space that was shut off from some great trouble on the other side of the door. It reminded me of when I was a kid, and I would sit in the bathroom, letting the shower run, knowing my parents fighting in the other room wouldn't bother me in there. If that seems like too much information, it's because it's such a specific kind of feeling, and if you can relate, you might understand how weird it was to suddenly be feeling it here. The point was, I sat down on one of those little benches facing the wall of dryers. I sat down, looked at my phone for a minute, then I leaned my head back and shut my eyes. The next thing I remember was the sound of someone trying to turn the locked doorknob to the laundry room. The room has sort of an L shape, and my back was to a wall that blocked my view of the door, so I couldn't see who it was. I could tell, however, that they were really trying to get in, shaking the knob violently as if the electronic lock would give out with enough pressure. I thought about letting them in, but then I heard them. "Hello?" a man's voice said. "Are you in there? Can you open the door? Open the door, please." Maybe I'm just a bad person, but as soon as I heard him speak, I froze. I decided, in that moment, not to be a good Samaritan, and instead stay sat there, where I knew he couldn't see me. I remember thinking to myself, if he was supposed to be in here, he'd have the app on his phone too. If he was allowed in here, he would unlock the door. The idea of a stranger trying to get into the laundry room with me this late at night, a stranger who didn't even live here, was enough to keep me away from that door. I was stuck there now, and so I leaned my head back against the wall and shut my eyes again. "Hey." I snapped back awake at the sound of another person. There was a guy peeking over from the bend of the corner, as if he wasn't sure if he was supposed to see me there or not. He was dressed in a black sweatshirt and skinny jeans, bald with the greenest eyes I think I've ever seen. He was pale and gaunt, and had a look that made me think tweaker against my better judgment. I made small talk with him, trying to act like I wasn't just asleep. We talked about how hot it was out there. He asked which machines were empty, and I said all of them more or less. It was an awkward, quick little exchange, until he said, "Did you hear me at the door?" I felt icicles on the back of my neck. It was only now that I recognized the guy's voice as the same from before. I felt guilty, and more than that, afraid of what he might do if I said yes. I immediately felt all the more uncomfortable being alone here with this guy. No," I said. "I was asleep. Sorry." "Are you lying to me?" He said with a weird sternness in his voice. It was like a parent talking to a child. "No," I responded. "No, I really was just asleep. I couldn't hear you. Sorry." "Huh," he responded. He stared at me for a moment, his mouth hanging slightly open. It felt like the longest couple of seconds of my life, until he walked away to tend to his wash cycle. I stayed at my phone until he left, dreading every single moment as I attentively listened to the sounds of his footsteps, until I heard the door shut again. When I was certain he was gone, I knew it was time to get back home, but then I froze again. If I was uncomfortable being alone in here with him, I thought, it would be so much worse being alone out there, in the dark, with him. What if he followed me home? The thought kept me on that bench until I felt my eyes closing again. When they opened again, that dude was back in front of me, leaning down, staring right into my face. I jumped, to say the least, but didn't have the courage to shout at him or do anything but whisper, "What the?" in a panic. "You fell asleep," he said, like some kind of detective. His inflection was so strange. It was like he was asking me a question and making a statement at the same time. I don't know which it was, so I responded, "Yeah." I was as far back against the wall as I could be at this point, clearly trying to get away from the man standing between me and my escape. Instead of seeing how uncomfortable I was, though, he chose to sit right down next to me. I felt like I might just break into tears at that moment. "Are you here all alone?" That question was maybe the worst thing I could have heard at that moment. "No," I lied. "I'm waiting on my brother." I don't have a brother, much less one I was waiting on, but I wanted to put the image in the guy's head that there was another man coming here soon. I felt like it might keep me safe. "Aha," he said in response. His voice was raspy, and the weird way of pronouncing what I imagined was meant to be, "uh-huh," felt like someone trying to remember how to sound human. It's then that he put his hands on my thigh. "You're a sweet thing," he said, and I felt my lower lip tremble. "Sweet and tender." I'm a man, and I'm not in the best shape, so I am in no way used to getting hit on. Certainly not by crackhead dudes with no sense of personal space. It was possible, I assume, but something about the way he was looking at me made it feel wrong. I struggled to describe it, even in my own head. He wasn't looking at me in a way that felt lecherous. In fact, it didn't look like he had any kind of desire within him at all. Instead, it felt like there was some kind of inexplainable hunger behind those eyes. Whatever the case, I never wanted to know what he was thinking in that moment. I heard the door open again, and the sound was startling enough to break me out of my fear trance and make me stand up. Another man came in, this guy much heavier than both of us, and hairy too, with hair longer than most women I've met and a big beard on his face. It must have given some credence to my lie from before, because the tweaker guy stood up when he saw him. He shot me one more of those inexplainable glances before heading out the door. If I wasn't going to walk out that door before, I sure wasn't going to do it now. I felt way more comfortable with this new guy here anyway, especially since he seemed to mind his own business. Before I knew what I was doing, I found myself shutting my eyes again. Don't go with him. I woke up again to the sound of a new voice, and given what happened last time, I was in a panic. This time, however, it was just the heavier guy in the room with me, tending to his dryer. I must have slept through his entire wash cycle, and I was immediately surprised and worried that I wasn't woken up by the tweaker in all that time. You shouldn't go with him, the guy said again, his back facing me. I shouldn't go with who? I asked, confused, but somehow feeling like I knew just who he was talking about. Don't go with that guy, he said again, a bit of hum in his voice as he started the dry cycle. You won't like him. He isn't good for you. Okay, thanks, I said, not sure what else there was to say. He simply nodded and walked back out into the night. I realized quickly that this was probably my best chance to get home. I all but ran my way out, not caring about my laundry, which was still sitting wet in the washing machine. As soon as I cleared the threshold of the door, the dude was gone, nowhere to be seen, and I was immediately in some kind of panic. I started power walking towards my apartment when I heard a familiar voice, and my heart all but stopped. Hey ya there, he rasped, sweet and tender. I broke into a run towards the gate, and without thinking tried the handle. It was locked, of course, and as I reached for my phone, I could hear the sounds of rushed footsteps against the pavement behind me. My hands were shaking as I tried to unlock my phone, get to the app, and hold it to the gate's Bluetooth sensor. Oh my god, the loading bar. It felt intentionally designed to break my heart, moving up to 60% and then stopping for a few seconds. A second that felt like it would be my last. I cursed at my phone, my voice cracking, pleading to just work, until I finally heard that obnoxious beep, which at that moment was the greatest sound I had ever heard in my life. I reached for the gate and pulled it open. It got maybe 2 inches open when I felt firm hands grab my shoulders, pulling me back. I watched my grip slip off of the gate handle and saw it slam shut, locking in place. My eyes flew open, and I was back at the laundry room. I broke into a weak laugh, and even started crying a little bit. The laundry cycle was still going, and according to the timer on the machine, I couldn't have been asleep longer than 10 minutes. That was an hour ago. I'm sitting here still in the laundry room, typing all this out because I don't know how else to keep myself awake. I called 911 immediately, but I'm still waiting for a patrol car or something to show up. I told them that I felt like my life was in danger, that someone was following me and was going to attack me if I left the laundry room. I really didn't know what else to tell them. I don't know what to think myself, really. All I know is that a few minutes after I woke up, I heard the door of the laundry room shaking, and a familiar man's voice asking, "Hello? Are you in there? Can you open the door? Open the door?" Back in 2016, I was on a flight to Nashville. There was a storm that forced us to do an emergency landing in Atlanta. I was shuffling around with my bag, trying to find a way to get home, but it was the middle of the night. There was a single bus available, and it was heading the wrong way. Jacksonville. My options to get home were quickly running out, so I just went for the first possible option, renting a car. A lot of other people had apparently thought the same thing. I ended up in a queue, and by the time I reached the counter, clerks were already apologizing and closing. They had nothing left to give. I just slumped down in a chair with my phone, trying to figure out a plan C. About half an hour later, a lady behind the counter called out to me. Apparently there was a customer who'd booked a car but hadn't checked it out. It was up for grabs, if I wanted it. Of course I took it. I was a bit stressed. I hadn't had anything to eat, and it was close to 2 a.m. I was going to have to drive through the storm, and I wouldn't be home until, at best, early morning. It was going to be a long night. I got a forest green Chevrolet Equinox. Looked good enough. I was going to have to check it in once I got to Nashville, but I could probably walk from there or take an Uber. I signed off on all the papers, threw my bag in the back, plopped down in the driver's seat, and buried my face in my hands. I was already exhausted, but you gotta do what you gotta do. I stopped at a gas station on my way out of town, not to fill up on gas, it was already full, but to get myself a quick snack and something heavily caffeinated. I made a checklist in my head, trying to count the hours it'd take me. The I-75 to Chattanooga, then the I-24 to Nashville. I was looking at about a 4-hour drive, but considering the weather, I was probably going to have to slap another 30 to 60 minutes on top of that. I stocked up on snacks, got back in the car, turned on the radio, and hoped for the best. It was only droplets at that point, but the wind was picking up fast. Even then, I could feel it pushing from the northeast. There was this constant pressure forcing me to compensate. I felt that driving just a little too fast might make the wheels completely lose grip. The rain picked up as I passed through Marietta. The wipers were doing their best, but it was getting rough. I could barely see anything ahead. I was tuned into some calming piano music, but all it did was make me sleepy. I had to be focused. I had almost no time to react if anything were to step onto the road. The first half hour getting out of Atlanta was strange. I was still adjusting, and I think I was more tired than I realized. At one point, I thought I saw 2 people just off the road, holding a stop sign. At another point, I thought I saw a literal car wreck coming down the opposite lane. There was a pickup truck where I couldn't even see the driver. There's just something about blurred movement in the dark rain that makes our brains fill in the blanks, I thought. But I was warm and safe. I took my time, I did periodic stops, and I made my way northwest at a steady pace. 2 hours in, I stopped in Chattanooga. The rain was going strong. I was basically traveling along the path of the storm. I stopped to use the bathroom and stretch my legs. Getting back in my car, I turned up the radio for a bit and reached for a Slim Jim. Except there was no Slim Jim. Strange. I'd carefully counted everything out for the trip. I was going to have a snack at the halfway point, and a soda upon my final arrival. But my snack was gone. Again, it came back to uncertainty. Maybe I was being a bit ditzy about it. Maybe I'd already eaten it. Or maybe it just rolled between the seats. But I couldn't see it, and I was pretty sure of myself. As I pondered where I'd put it, a new song played on the radio. Don't worry, be happy. How fitting. I was just about to put the key in the ignition and leave when I got a text message. It was from the car rental place. They were asking me to return the keys. as I hadn't checked out my vehicle. What? I just stared at the screen for a bit. There must have been some kind of mistake. I was sitting in the vehicle right then and there. I was holding the key. It didn't make sense. I tried to text them back, but it was some sort of automated number. I figured I'd just talk to the folks when I returned it in Nashville instead. They would probably clear things up. I thought about going back inside and getting a new Slim Jim, but I couldn't be bothered. I fired the car right back up and headed for the I-24, putting my phone on mute for a bit as Don't Worry, Be Happy came to an end. Odd how that song came on in the first place, considering the station I was listening to was supposed to only play classical. I followed the road west, periodically looking down at the GPS. As the rain intensified, I realized I couldn't keep spending time looking away from the road, so I put the voice guide on. I turned my brain off and just followed the instructions for a bit, relaxing to the music. Then I saw a sign, Trenton. I was going the wrong way. I had to pull over at a rest stop. I'd gone about 20 minutes in the wrong direction. The storm was picking up, and during that short stop I saw no less than 2 lightning strikes. The rumble vibrated through me, making my bones itch. I got back in the car trying to figure out the GPS. I wiped the water from my eyes, trying to swipe the screen with wet fingers. I was so frustrated that I remember complaining out loud, "Come on, come on." For some reason, the GPS had been set to Langston, Alabama. If I'd followed the directions to a T, the car would have ended up on the bottom of Guntersville Lake. I hadn't even noticed how the radio had started playing Don't Worry, Be Happy. I just caught the last few notes as it ended. Getting back on the road, I knew I had to take a hard left to get back on track. I waited for a spot. "Take a right," the GPS said. I looked down. The arrow was pointing left. The target was Nashville, which was to the left. And yet, it told me to go right. I looked back up as I just missed a spot. A lot of trucks going by that night. "Take a right," it repeated. I was so frustrated that I laughed a little. I signaled left and got ready to turn, but the turn signal bounced right back up to neutral. I pushed it down again, and it bounced right back a second time. Finally, I just went with it. Turn signal or not, I was going left. As I finally made my way back to the I-24, I had to completely ignore the GPS. It was asking me to stop, to turn, to switch lanes. Anything but going straight, which was my destination. I just turned it off. That thing was clearly broken. I thought it had some kind of pre-saved destination that it defaulted to, and that I had to set up some kind of profile to fix it. Finally, back on the right track, I was coming up on a truck that had slowed down. As I turned to pass it, my headlights suddenly turned off. I managed to get out a "huh?" before I heard the whir of the engine dying. Then it all went dark. The car just died. Other cars had passed me, throwing themselves on the horn. I was barely visible. A dark car in the middle of the highway. At night, in full rain. It was a disaster waiting to happen. I slammed the dashboard, turning the key over and over again. Not a peep. Nothing. I took the key out, cleaned it on my shirt, swore a little more, and then the car started. I was still holding the key. Slowly I put the key back in the ignition. Not that it seemed to matter. I blinked a couple of times, not really knowing how to process this. Either way, I had to get going. I couldn't just stand still in the middle of the highway. Thank God I wasn't rear-ended. As I got back on the road, the GPS kicked up again. It was getting more decisive, giving me not only general directions, but distances. Repeated reminders over and over. I turned it off, but a couple of minutes later, it came back on. It wasn't sudden or even surprising at that point. The logo came back on screen, and then it was right back to the map, telling me where to go. I tried to ignore it, but it was getting harder. The radio would turn down with every reminder, so it would pull me out of whatever I was listening to. It seemed that no matter my intention, the car was hell-bent on getting to Guntersville Lake. "I'm not going," I muttered to myself. "I'm going home." The headlights blinked, almost as if responding. I shook my head. "It's just me," I continued. "It's all me." And again, the headlights blinked. I had to slow down as a truck passed me. The radio had gone quiet, and I expected another GPS reminder, but nothing came. Instead, I heard some kind of muffled noise. A low hum. "What?" I mumbled. The low hum returned a second time. I couldn't quite make it out. I just shook my head, trying my best not to think about it. But the third time I heard it, I couldn't ignore it. "Please turn." It was coming from inside the car. It was hard to say exactly where. Maybe inside the trunk or the glove compartment. I almost swerved off the road in surprise. The realization that there was a real, actual voice somewhere in the vehicle. Someone was in there with me. I had nowhere to pull over, so I kept my head straight, focusing on the road ahead. I could feel my chest pounding as my mind rolled over, trying to figure out what was really happening. Maybe it auto-connected a call or something. Maybe it was someone calling through the GPS. "Who said that?" I wheezed. "Who's there?" "I'm with you," it answered. "I'd like to see the lake." I'm going to the city. After that, you can do whatever you want." "It needs to." A short pause. "It rains." It was a mumble, but it was getting clearer. An ambiguous voice. Possibly a young woman. It was hard to tell. "They never picked me," it continued. "They were supposed to pick me." "I'm not sure what you think is happening here," I said, "but I have no idea what you're referring to. This has nothing to do with me." "You're going to the lake." "I can drop you off right here if you want, but I'm not going anywhere else. This is my car. I paid for it." There were a few seconds of quiet, as if contemplating a proper response. The mumble turned sour, more aggressive. "Can't be bought." The car began to steer left. I had to keep pulling to the right to avoid hitting the divider. The rain was already intense, and I was going at a high speed. Any sudden movement could have devastating consequences. Other cars were honking at me, trying to warn me that I was turning back and forth erratically. As resistance in the steering wheel increased, I found myself straining to bend the wheels back to the right. Then, all resistance just stopped. I could move the wheel any way I wanted. Problem was, the car wasn't responding. It kept going to the left, now out of control. As the car started to spin, there was a sequence of thumping noise, as if something heavy hit the asphalt. Then I got that feeling in my gut, like I was falling from a great height. Another thump, a blink of the headlights, and we were in the opposite lane, going back to where we came from, except the car was still heading off-road. I was just holding on for dear life at this point. I tried to hold the steering wheel straight, but it did nothing. There was no control. "Broke the contract," it kept mumbling. "They broke the contract." There was this rhythmic thumping on both sides of the car as it kept steering towards the edge of the road. Other cars were passing by, swerving desperately to get out of the way. One of them clipped the taillight, and for a second I thought I'd see my life flash before my eyes. But somehow, the car kept going. Straight off the road. I thought it'd be a big crash. The roadside was uneven, leading into a field, and yet the car went straight into it seemingly without issue. I could see something moving just outside the driver's side window. With every rhythmic thump, something moved, and beyond the sound of my pounding heart, there was something else. The GPS had gone completely mad by now, repeating straight ahead over and over on repeat. But there was another sound. I pressed the brakes and the gas and nothing happened. But as I pushed the gas, I heard something. The wheels were spinning. They weren't touching the ground. I let go of the steering wheel. It didn't matter anymore. I was coming to the realization that I wasn't even in control anymore, and reached for my phone. The moment my call connected to the emergency services, the radio started to shriek to the point where I thought my ears would bleed. Not a single word got through. The car was going past the field and into the forest. It was going way too fast, but it managed to dodge and weave through the trees with only minor bumps. I was being tossed around like on a roller coaster. Finally, a sharp turn. My head hit the steering wheel. I didn't exactly black out, but I think I had a concussion. I just sort of zoned out. By the time I came to, I heard a gulping noise. The hood of the car was submerged in water. I was sinking. We were at Guntersville Lake. After a bit of clicking, I managed to get the seatbelt off and tumbled out the door. My face hit the dirt with a thud, and I could smell lake water and reeds. I crawled away, trying desperately to keep the world from spinning. Something warm was running into my eye, which made me realize I was still bleeding from the head. Gaining some distance from the forest green Chevrolet Equinox, I realized a couple of things. One, that the wheels seemed to have come off. They were leaning out of the wheel hub. And two, that the car wasn't sinking into a lake. It was bending down as if drinking from it. I know what you're thinking. I had a head wound. I was exhausted and sleep deprived. Well, all of that is true. That doesn't change what I was experiencing. It was leaning down and the gulping noise sounded exactly like drinking. I just looked at it confused. I noticed something moving. With the wheels leaning down, there was something else moving around in the wheelhouse. Just like I'd seen something moving with that rhythmic thumping earlier. I came to suspect that there was something just out of sight. It didn't take long for my suspicions to be realized, as a claw-like appendage extended from underneath the metal hull, like a combination of serrated beetle pincers and a scorpion stinger, but with a soft white shell. It squeezed itself out, lifting the car like the shell of a crab. As two massive headlights turned towards me, I could hear that voice again, this time coming from under the hood, still muffled. "You live," it said. And for a brief moment, none of us seemed to know what to do. I could hear a cockroach-like clicking coming from under the hood, as if an appendage strained against the metal. I turned only to see more headlights peeking through the distant tree line. There was the sound of shuffling grass as something large moved through the field. I wiped the rainwater from my brow and squinted, forcing my eyes to focus. An electric moped, crawling on all fours. A spider-like delivery truck, and further off, bounding through a field, a six-legged pickup truck. I stayed very still as the various vehicles moved closer, close enough for me to hear the rain pitter-pattering against their metal frames. They were moving much more organically by now, having mixtures of humanoid and insectoid limbs. The metal was groaning as they shambled back and forth. It was a surreal experience. Not only were they communicating in a sort of insectoid clicking, but they were also using their vehicle characteristics. Doors, alarms, radios, trunks, seats, and windows opening, closing and moving to accentuate their communication. I was nothing but a meaningless bystander. I think they forgot about me for a moment. I stayed completely still for probably about an hour or so. My body was trembling from the cold and the head wound. I had considered all my options over and over in the back of my mind. There was no way to outrun them, so maybe I could just wait them out. Then again, that was a roll of a die. As soon as they got a reminder that I was even there, they might deal with me immediately. The best thing I could do was to move, slow and steady, ready to burst into a sprint if necessary. Still, with the way my legs wobbled and my head spinning, I wasn't confident. Slow and steady, that had to be the ticket. So as the vehicles circled one another, metal groaning as they shifted through the reeds, I crawled along the edge of the lake. I made it about 20 feet before the electric moped turned my way. There was a cacophony of screeching noises as the ground around me lit up like a Christmas tree. My pulse shot through the roof. I threw myself into the lake hoping for the best. If I'd been cold before, now I was freezing. I was submerged completely, feeling my clothes weighing me down. I had to struggle to even breach the surface. Swimming further out, I noticed the headlights staying by the beach. They were looking my way, lighting up the water around me, but not following. For a moment, I thought I'd done the right thing, that all I had to do was keep going, and I'd be in the clear. But a thought hit me. Why had they come here, and why were they gathering around this particular part of the lake? It didn't take long for an answer to surface. Something brushed against my feet, something small and fast. I could see little white crab-like creatures rushing past just beneath the surface, poking at my legs and feet, as if to test me, and far down in the deep, something moved. The water shifted, pushing me away. I started swimming. My head felt like it had come loose, like an empty glass bottle rolling around the floor of a bus, clinking back and forth. I was not okay, and I started to realize that there was a very real possibility that I might just drown. A great wave pushed me. I drifted about 40 or so feet as something massive made its way out of the lake. It looked like an abandoned train car, probably from the late 40s or so. Paint long since stripped and roof covered in algae. The glass windows were long since broken off the hinges. Watching it step out of the lake, with water spilling out of the broken doors, was unreal. There seemed to be some sort of discussion, a scolding perhaps, as the larger one screeched and pushed the smaller vehicles, like an alpha wolf trying to see if anyone was brave enough to step up for a challenge. Minutes later, I saw the forest green Chevrolet Equinox moving away, headlights scanning the high grass as the hood popped. Even at a distance, I could hear that voice again, clearer now. "Come out," it called. "Please, come out." By then, I had drifted ashore about 60 or so feet south. Pushed by the waves, I'd crawled into the reeds, resting my head against a large rock. I couldn't move anymore. The shakes had turned into fatigue. Even if I wanted to, I couldn't. "Come out," the voice repeated. "Come out now." I couldn't. I just lay there, hypothermic, and waited. But nothing came for me. The green Chevrolet Equinox scanned the area. It searched, but it couldn't find me. It was growing increasingly panicked, its voice becoming shrill and animalistic. The others circled it. "Come out," it repeated. "Please, please come out." Then, a horrifying screech. It blared out this distorted version of "Don't worry, be happy" that reminded me of a dying bird. It was like dragging a knife along a guitar string, followed by rusted metal bending at unnatural angles. Steel against steel, crunching, groaning, tearing. Headlights blinking and sweeping over me as the voice turned to a scream. "Please," it begged. "Please." Then, nothing. By then I was barely conscious. A slow parade of a pickup truck, an electric moped, and a delivery truck rolled away in the distance. And finally, a train car, lifted by 100 little arms, moving like a centipede. It stopped next to me. Seeing it up close, I could notice more details. Black shark-like eyes peeking through cracks in the sheet metal. Worm-like appendages holding plates together as a shield. 1,000 micro-movements just beneath the surface. This was a living hive, a creature parading as something else. But it didn't care. 100 little beady eyes looked my way, but it had already made up its mind. Or maybe it thought I was done for. Long after the thump of the vehicles had passed, I crawled forward. I had reeds and flowers stuck to my hair. I think I swallowed a couple of blue petals from a sunflower. Along the bank of the lake, I found the remains of the green Chevrolet Equinox. The top and windshield of the car had caved in, and there were long tears along the side of it, like battle wounds on a dead animal. Part of the engine lay scattered in the dirt. It was half submerged, but I could reach into the driver's seat. The door was gone. I waved my arm around, searching desperately for something I knew to be there. And thank God I found it. My phone, buried under the remains of the busted glove compartment. I have no memory of my call for help, but I can't imagine it was coherent. The EMTs found me hypothermic and concussed, leaning against the car. They said I must have been hit by a large vehicle and, concussed, kept driving into nowhere. They had no idea about where I got the car from, though. The rental was still back in Atlanta. I didn't have any answers. It's been a few years, and I've recovered. I was in a rough shape back there, and I'm sure that was the most dangerous moment of my life. I saw something I wasn't supposed to, but it has also made me question things that I've seen since. There are several articles that I've read about vehicular accidents that just don't make sense to me. Situations where cars have seemingly gone out of their way to crash or kill. I'm sure you've seen a couple too. But there are other things too. Some of the posts I've read on here speak about inanimate objects taking on a seemingly conscious intelligence. Could it be that it's not all just make-believe? Those things I felt in the lake were no larger than a hand. I'm sure they could use something as small as a computer, as a shell if they wanted to. I don't know. I don't know what to think. And I don't know what to trust. But I know for sure there is something living right under our noses. And I don't think there's anything being done about it. I found the photograph among a pile of old, dusty albums in the attic. It had been years since I last ventured up there, and the nostalgia of my childhood was bittersweet. But as I flipped through the pages, a single photo caught my eye, sending a chill down my spine. It was an old, faded image of an elderly woman sitting in what looked like a dimly lit room. She was dressed in a pink shirt, her expression vacant and distant. Her eyes seemed to bore into the camera, or perhaps through it with an unsettling intensity. I didn't recognize her, yet there was something disturbingly familiar about her face. I showed the photo to my mother, hoping she could shed some light on the mysterious woman. Her reaction was immediate and visceral. She gasped, her face draining of color as she snatched the picture from my hands. "Where did you find this?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "In the attic," I replied, taken aback by her reaction. "Who is she?" My mother stared at the photo for a long moment before finally speaking. "That's your great-grandmother, Eleanor. We don't talk about her much. She had some issues." "What kind of issues?" I pressed, curious despite the growing sense of dread in my stomach. "She was institutionalized when I was a child," my mother explained, her voice hushed. "She claimed to see things, hear voices. They said she was schizophrenic, but she always insisted it was something else. Something darker." I took the photo back, examining it more closely. The room in the background was shadowy, almost as if it was swallowing the light. There was a strange blur near her hand, almost like a motion blur but more sinister, as if something was trying to escape the frame. That night, I couldn't get the image out of my head. I placed it on my nightstand, hoping that some sleep would help me shake off the eerie feeling. But as the hours passed, I found myself unable to drift off. The darkness in my room felt oppressive, the shadows lengthening and shifting in ways that defied logic. Around midnight, I heard a faint whispering, barely audible but persistent. I strained to make out the words, but it was like trying to grasp smoke. The whispers grew louder, and I realized they were coming from the direction of the photograph. I turned on my bedside lamp, the sudden light blinding me momentarily. When my eyes adjusted, I saw the photograph had fallen to the floor, the image of Eleanor now eerily illuminated by the lamp's glow. The whispering stopped, replaced by a heavy silence that pressed down on me. Picking up the photo, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. In the background, behind Eleanor, there was a faint outline of a figure, almost invisible but definitely there. It sent a shiver down my spine. Was this what she had claimed to see? Unable to shake the feeling of being watched, I decided to do some research on Eleanor. The next day I visited the local library and dug through old newspapers and records. What I found was chilling. Eleanor had been committed to the asylum after she attacked her husband, claiming he was possessed by a dark spirit. She became increasingly violent and paranoid, convinced that something was after her. Her claims were dismissed as the ravings of a madwoman, but the more I read, the more I began to believe there was something to her stories. I found her old journal, a small leather-bound book filled with erratic writing. Her entries were a mix of lucid thoughts and frantic scribbles, detailing her descent into madness. She described seeing shadowy figures, hearing whispers in the night, and feeling an oppressive presence that never left her alone. One entry stood out to me. March 3rd, 1956. The shadows are getting closer. They whisper my name, taunt me with promises of peace if I just give in. I see them in every corner, every dark place. They want me. I know it, but I won't give in. I won't. The more I read, the more I felt a creeping dread settle over me. The descriptions matched what I had been experiencing since finding the photo. The whispers, the shadows, the sense of being watched. It was all too real. That night the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. They seemed to echo through my mind, filling me with a sense of impending doom. I clutched the photo, feeling a strange compulsion to keep it close. As the hours dragged on, I saw movement in the corner of my eye. A shadow, darker than the rest, seemed to shift and pulse almost as if it was alive, my heart pounding in my chest as I watched it slowly take shape, forming into the figure I had seen in the background of the photograph. It moved closer, a black amorphous shape that seemed to absorb the light around it. I could feel its malevolence, a tangible force that sent waves of fear coursing through me. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, and I realized they were coming from the shadow itself. "Give in," it hissed, the voice of a twisted, distorted echo. "Join us." I scrambled out of bed, my mind racing. The shadow followed, relentless and unyielding. I felt a cold touch on my skin, a tendril of darkness wrapping around my arm. Panic surged through me and I lashed out, my hand passing through the shadow with no effect. Desperation took hold and I ran to the attic, the one place that seemed to hold any answers. I found the box of old albums and rifled through them, hoping to find something, anything that could help. As I pulled out the albums, I noticed a small, hidden compartment at the bottom of the box. Inside was another journal, older and more worn than the first. It belonged to Eleanor, but the entries were different. They were written in a shaky hand, the words barely legible. October 31st, 1955. They came for me tonight. The shadows, they are real. I know that now. They took my husband. He is gone and I am alone, but they won't stop. They want me. They will never stop. I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck. I turned to see the shadow looming over me, its form twisting and writhing. The whispers were deafening now, a cacophony of voices all urging me to give in, to surrender. In a moment of clarity, I realized what I had to do. I grabbed the photograph and the journal and I ran to the backyard. The wind howled around me as I built a small fire, my hands trembling. I threw the photograph into the flames, watching as it curled and blackened. The shadows seemed to scream, a sound that pierced through me, and I knew I was doing the right thing. I tossed the journal in after the photo, the pages catching fire and burning away the darkness. As the fire died down, the whispers faded, and the oppressive presence lifted. I felt a sense of peace, a calmness that I hadn't known in days. The shadows were gone, banished by the flames, but the peace was short-lived. As I walked back inside, I saw a reflection in the window. Eleanor's face, her eyes filled with a silent warning. The shadows may have been gone, but the darkness remained, waiting for another chance. I knew then that this was not the end. The darkness had been a part of my family for generations, and it would not be so easily defeated. It was only a matter of time before it returned, and I had to be ready. The photograph may have been destroyed, but the shadows left their mark on me. I could feel them lurking in the corners of my mind, whispering their promises of peace, and deep down, I knew that one day I would have to face them again. For now, I keep the journal close in my thoughts, a reminder of the darkness that haunts my family. And every night as I lay in bed, I listen to the whispers, knowing that the shadows are always watching, always waiting.